Okay, let's dive right into this explainer. Today, we're unpacking a pretty dense, highly detailed 30-plus page document. It's the 2024 Illinois Highway Safety Plan Annual Report. Now, it's absolutely packed with data, strategic objectives, and millions of dollars in federal and state funding allocations. But to truly understand the gravity of this report, we really can't just start with spreadsheets and pie charts. We have to start with a very tragic, very real human reality.
Because this is what those statistics actually look like on the ground. At 9:15 p.m. on a Friday in Kendall County, the driver of a Chevy Impala was traveling south on Route 71. In an attempt to pass several cars, they collided head-on with oncoming traffic. The resulting four-vehicle crash ended the lives of 3 people, including a 4-year-old girl, and left 2 others severely injured. This wasn't some unavoidable act of nature. It was a choice made behind the wheel, and it perfectly illustrates the harrowing stakes that transportation officials face every single day. Behind every single data point we're going to look at today, there is a shattered family and a lost human life.
So the absolutely crucial question becomes this: how on earth does a state protect over 9 million licensed drivers from themselves? That Kendall County tragedy, it's just one local news story, but it represents the macroscopic battle the Illinois Department of Transportation, or IDOT, is waging against exactly these types of behavioral failures. Section 1. Illinois by the numbers. Let's look at the macro context. To really grasp the challenge here, you've got to appreciate the sheer scale of the playing field. Illinois is a wildly complex, sprawling transportation network. We're looking at a state with 12.58 million residents. It's this massive mix of dense urban centers like Chicago, sprawling suburbs, and vast, wide-open stretches of rural highways. Overseeing safety across that kind of diverse landscape, it requires immense resources and coordination. And the sheer volume of activity on those roads is staggering. 103.08 billion. That is the number of annual vehicle miles traveled by drivers across the state's 147,000 lane miles. Just let that number sink in for a second. Billions of miles driven every single year. That means literally billions of opportunities for a driver to glance down at their phone, to press the gas pedal just a little too hard, or to make a risky pass on a 2-lane road at 9:15 at night. Which brings us to the heavy human cost. In 2023 alone, there were 1,241 traffic fatalities in Illinois. Out of all those billions of miles traveled, 1,241 times, a journey ended in the absolute worst possible way. When you contrast the massive scale of the state's infrastructure with this highly concentrated, devastating loss of life, you start to see why the state treats highway safety not just as a policy issue, but as a full-blown, ongoing crisis. Section 2. Falling Short. The Battle for Safety. Every year, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration requires states to set benchmarks based on a 5-year rolling average. And if we look at whether Illinois is on track for 2024, the answer is a hard no across the board. For 2024, the target for total fatalities was just under 1,122. They missed it. The actual progress result pushed past 1,229. For speeding-related deaths, they wanted to stay under 418. They didn't. Alcohol-impaired fatalities, the target was 330, but the actual was over 342. Statistically speaking, the state is currently losing this specific battle. The trends are just heading in the wrong direction. So the really important thing is understanding why. The data continually points the finger at 3 main behavioral choices, what we can essentially call the fatal 3: impairment, speeding, and unbelted occupants. Remember, roughly 30% of annual fatalities in Illinois involve impaired drivers. Almost a third are speeding-related. And unbelted occupant fatalities, they remain stubbornly high. Now, these aren't engineering failures with the roads themselves. They are human choices. Section 3. The Counteroffensive. IDOT's strategy. So let's break down this enforcement counteroffensive. Through their Sustained Traffic Enforcement Program, or STEP, grant-funded law enforcement agencies issued a staggering 227,226 total citations in 2024. Just think about where they're focusing all that energy. Over 63,000 tickets just for speeding. Over 47,000 for occupant restraint, meaning people simply choosing not to wear their seatbelts. And nearly 1,900 alcohol and drug-related citations. They're deploying high-visibility enforcement exactly where the data tells them the bleeding is happening. But it's not just about handing out tickets.
IDOT relies on a seriously multi-pronged systemic intervention approach. Sure, they fund high-visibility blitzes during high-risk times like Memorial Day or Super Bowl Sunday, but they also go way deeper. They're funding problem-solving DUI courts in places like Peoria and Kane counties. These courts use evidence-based interventions for repeat offenders to actually stop the cycle. With the rise of complex intoxicants, they've trained 147 specialized drug recognition expert officers across the whole state. They even support electronic no-refusal search warrants to force blood tests on suspected drunk drivers. They are attacking the problem from the very moment of the traffic stop all the way through the judicial system.
Section 4. Changing driver behavior. The media war. Because to truly win, you have to change a driver's mindset before they even turn the key. IDOT doesn't just fund the police. They fund public awareness. And the data shows this psychological messaging is actually working. Based on post-Memorial Day surveys, 74% of the public recalled the click it or ticket slogan. Friends don't let friends drive drunk is sitting at 61%. These aren't just catchy phrases, right? They're carefully engineered educational campaigns designed to lodge a real sense of consequence directly into our minds. When more than half the state recognizes that buzzed driving is drunk driving, it means the baseline culture of what is acceptable is slowly being shifted.
Right at the center of all this is the It's Not a Game campaign. This is a massive, multifaceted paid media push using radio, television, and digital platforms. In 2024 alone, this specific digital campaign generated over 116 million impressions. That's 116 million times an ad popped up on a phone, a streaming service, or a website just to remind you, the driver, of the real-world consequences of your driving habits. They want to make absolutely sure you remember that driving a 2-ton machine at 70 miles per hour is not a game you can afford to lose. Section 5. The Road to Zero. The ultimate goal. This brings us to the ultimate, basically non-negotiable target, Vision Zero. The state envisions a future where absolutely no one loses their life traveling on public roadways. I mean, it sounds impossible, right? But setting the goal at anything higher than zero means accepting that a certain number of mothers, fathers, and 4-year-old girls are just an acceptable price to pay for transportation. IDOT's immediate stepping stone is a 2% annual reduction, aiming to drop the fatality rolling average below 958 by 2026. It is a massive uphill battle, but honestly, it is the only moral target a state can possibly have. There's this really powerful quote from the beginning of the report from Stephen B. Sekbierhain, the governor's highway safety representative. She writes, "Safety doesn't happen by accident." It's a great play on words, but more importantly, it bridges the macroscopic data of a government report right back down to the human level. Every single individual driver shares the responsibility of reaching zero fatalities. The police can issue 1 million citations, but they can't sit in the passenger seat and force you to put your phone down or buckle your seatbelt. So, I want to leave you with this final thought. Take a real look at your own behavior behind the wheel. Are you speeding just to save 3 minutes on your commute? Are you checking a text message in moving traffic? What habit will you change today to help your community and your state reach zero fatalities? Because as we saw in Kendall County, the difference between a totally normal Friday night and a devastating tragedy is quite literally just one bad decision. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and please stay safe out there.